Hello, my name is Sidney Porter, and it's my pleasure on behalf of the Health Physics Society History Committee to interview one of our charter members and one of our most contributing members that the Society has ever had. Jack Selby is one of the members that has contributed, I think, from the very beginning, really. He was at Hanford for many, many years, and I can remember from the earliest meetings that Jack was always a leader. And it's my pleasure to introduce Jack to you and to go through his very celebrated life in health physics, and also to talk about the many things that he has contributed to our society. And so with no further ado, Jack, let's start talking about why you were even interested in science to begin with.
Well, in high school, I got very excited with strong math, physics, and chemistry courses. Both the physics and math part of them were taught by Mr. Price, and some of the advanced math and chemistry was taught by Zerger, who was also my line coach when I played football. And there was just never any question in my mind, but that was the area I wanted to go into. I'm sure it was a disappointment to my dad because he was an ag engineer and would have liked to see me follow his steps.
But anyway, you got through high school knowing that you were interested in the sciences at that point, and since you were in a college town, you went ahead to Kansas State?
That's correct.
And did you start knowing you wanted to be a chemist, or did that take a while?
No, I immediately started. They had a very special chemistry course that they had put together because the head of the department was on a credentialing committee for the American Chemical Society, and so we had a fairly tough chemistry course, and you really, if you wanted to do it in 4 years, you needed to start right off the bat. So I went right into it.
And did you specialize in analytical chemistry or any particular kind of chemistry?
Well, it had earlier been called industrial chemistry, and what it really did, then they got rid of that name, but it gave you a broad cross-section of chemistry. They required a full year of engineering physics, and they required some other associated courses like engineering drawing and metallurgy. There were a couple of them that I had to take.
So you ended up with a very broad brush of the. Did you have PChem while you were there too?
Oh yes, and organic and semi-micro qualitative analysis, and that's a real challenge to do it in very small quantities. But that's the type of thing that we have to do when you get into the radiation field in a chemical laboratory. They do work with as small quantities as possible.
Absolutely. So in 1954 you graduated with a bachelor's in chemistry.
That's correct.
And at that point, tell us about your life.
Well, it was an interesting day. In order to stay in school, I had to take ROTC, including senior ROTC, so I had a commitment to go into the service for a couple years. The Sunday morning of graduation, I got my commission as a second lieutenant in the Chemical Corps. The afternoon, I got my diploma, and that evening, I married my wife, Gwen. Her dad was the head of the chemistry department, so.
You didn't waste a lot of time, did you, there?
We didn't waste, and we left that evening.
and you went to Edgewood, Maryland?
No, we went directly to Hanford.
Oh, to Hanford,
I was able to get a year of deferment, and I felt like if I wanted to make use of the 2 years that I had to spend in the service, I wanted to have a year in industry, and I had focused some specialized courses in the nuclear area, so I was very interested in going to Hanford.
And so you went to Hanford, and the great H.M. Parker was there, I take it.
That's correct. Jack Healy, a number of the people, and then some younger ones who have been my mentors, and in most cases, they're fortunate they're alive and they still are my mentors. So
I see. Well, Art Keene was probably there when you were there.
Art Keene was there. I worked directly with Joe Soldat, Carl Unruh, Jack Corley. In fact, I worked for some or all of those. Ed Watson's another one who fortunately died a number of years ago. So I've been very fortunate to have tremendous mentors that I can try to follow in their footsteps.
Well, that's wonderful. Now, tell us, after your year there, you had to pay your dues.
I had to pay my dues. I went to Alabama to Fort McClellan, which is really interesting in the summer to be wearing protective clothing.
Yes.
And after 3 months there, we supposedly could go wherever one of our first two choices. So our first two choices were England and Germany. And they called me in about the third week and said, we've already got you assigned to Army Chemical Center, because they had lost their license and they discovered I had a year in industry in health physics. And so that's what really got me off to a start, because I was still not sure whether I wanted to stay in health physics or to go get into chemistry, which was my first love. And so
you went to Edgewood, was it?
I went to Edgewood, and I was the assistant chief of health physics. In fact, I was in charge of it until they got a new civilian in. They had lost their license, and we got it back. And a lot of the things that you hear about even today, radium and depleted uranium, and some of the other things, we had to deal with there because it had been some pretty sloppy practices. We were just talking to Don Collins here just before you and I started talking. One of the things that I remember is that in trying to clean up the mess that we inherited, I came across a 2x2 cube with a corner cut off. It was very heavy, so we
2 inch by 2 inch, 2 inch cube. Yeah.
Right. So we determined that must be uranium. And I suppose probably for 5 seconds I thought, gee, that'd be nice to keep. And then I got to thinking, no, you get in trouble. So we went ahead and put it in a barrel of concrete along with all the radium sources that we had found. And it's sitting down on the ocean floor off of New Jersey shore. Later on, when I got to know Don Collins, we happened to be talking over dinner one night, and I'm describing this. And Don said, did it have a corner off? And I said, yes. And he said, I was on the team that went into Germany after the Second War, and that was one of the fuel elements out of the old German pile. So it's interesting, and I often think it's too bad that isn't available for the archives now.
Now, that was a piece of fuel that was in the original pile that...
the German pile.
Yeah, let me see, who was working? I'm trying to think of the woman that worked on that. There was a, okay, I'm just blanking her name now. But in any case, that's the one that we heard about and then recreated at the University of Chicago.
Right,
under the squash stands there.
Right.
Lisa Meitner. Lisa Meitner was one of the people that worked on that.
Right.
And sadly, she did not get a Nobel Prize for that. I was told that had she been a man, she would have. That's sad.
It is sad.
But in any case, so how did you know that thing wasn't full of fission products?
Well, we measured it, and it apparently had been on the outer edge, and there was no.
It wasn't too bad.
It was, it was radioactive, obviously, but it was not like the radium sources that we were getting rid of.
Okay, so let's jump back into the chronicle here. You've just finished your 2 years with the Army Chemical Corps, and they offer you a discharge. Did you take it?
Well, no, they didn't offer me a discharge. They wanted me to stay. In fact, I had advanced to a first lieutenant they offered a regular Army appointment and a captain rank if I were to stay, but they couldn't guarantee that I could stay in health physics, and by that time I knew that's what I wanted to do. So
Now, how did you know that, Jack?
I enjoyed it. It used all of the disciplines that I had learned in college, all of the technical, all of the scientific disciplines, and I enjoyed working with people, and so that I felt that was my calling.
So you went ahead and left the Army at that point,
Mm-hmm.
and tell me about your work history then.
Well, I got back to Hanford because we felt like that was where we wanted to live, and there was
Any children by then?
no children, and that I'll tell you a quick story about that in a minute. But anyway, we went back there, but personnel had neglected to tell Art Keene that I was coming back, and Art Keene had hired several people about 3 months before I got there, and then they announced a layoff, and personnel decided it was last in, first out, even though they owed me, they had the responsibility to take me back since I'd gone into service. So anyway, they gave me basically a 9-month notice that if something didn't change by the following June, why then we would have to be looking for another job. You asked about children. One of the things that did occur in the service, my wife and I believed that we were going to have our kids while we were in the service and therefore let them pay for it, and we discovered that we could not have them. And so there were a couple things that occurred. One was I gave up going back to graduate school because you don't adopt children and be in graduate school. That's just, they don't, it won't work. And secondly, it did to some extent impact other decisions. Well, anyway, as soon as we got back to Hanford, we applied and things were going along well, and I got an offer from Lockheed in Georgia around the 1st of February of 58.
ANP? Aircraft
The
nuclear
aircraft
propulsion?
nuclear propulsion. And about the 5th of February, the caseworker came by and said, "We have a boy for you." So we thought, oh my, here I've accepted a job and there's a child and so available. So we told her that I would stay and look for a job in a grocery store or something. And she said, "You must think we're really awful." So they went ahead and went with it and placed the child with us. We left 2 months or 3 months later, went to Georgia. They handled all of the casework down there to finish up. And then we started process down there for a girl. In the meantime, the AMP program, as you know, was terminated. And so in the process, I almost went to Savannah River. And I think the good Lord was looking out again, because Patterson called Art Keene and said, "What do you know about Selby? I'm thinking about hiring him." And Keene said, "Well, he would be a good one to have on your staff." And then when he got through talking to Patterson, he got a hold of Chuck Billis, who I'd worked with at Lockheed, and he said, "Chuck, why don't you let Selby know that we would have a job out here if he's interested?" So I called, and there was an opening. We went to Hanford. Patterson wouldn't speak to Keene for a while on that. But anyway, we got out there, and they transferred the papers, and the adoption agency said, "Well, you can't ask for a girl." And then they got the papers from Georgia, and the lady had done them so completely. They said, "We'll accept this." They backdated it to the date that she had started it. And we were only there about 3 months, and our daughter came along.
Oh, how wonderful.
And then we did get one more. So we feel that that my career benefited by a lot of the changes that occurred, but more importantly, our life benefited substantially by these changes.
Oh, of course. Now, tell me about what your first real job was in health physics, so to speak. No, you had some at Edgewood, of course.
Right.
And I guess that they were in a way your first real jobs where you weren't apprenticing, so to speak.
That's correct.
And there, that was mostly what DU.
It's an RSO. No, they were labeling
DU
nerve gases with phosphorus 32 and iodine 131 and a few other radioactive chemicals, and then they could trace where these nerve gases would end up at when they would inject or put them on the skin surface of an animal. And so then I was responsible for the safety features of that testing program. And of course the radioactive material, as far as I was concerned, was a zero risk compared to that nerve gas.
Absolutely, yes. So you were there for a couple of years, and then finished up your tour of duty, and went via Savannah River back to
not Savannah River. We went to Hanford, and then to Georgia, and then back to Hanford.
and then right. Back again.
And the first real assignments, if you will, at Hanford, and I did have. It was fortunate when I got back from the service. They put me in an environmental group, and that's where I shared an office with Joe Soldat. And I have many war stories to tell, but it'll take too long right now.
He's a wonderful human being, though.
He is a wonderful human. He is a wonderful human being. And Joe tried to teach me everything he knew, which is difficult because he knew so much about it. But anyway, when I went to Lockheed, I was put in charge of the environmental program, and we were having to do pre-op environmental surveys and so on. So it. You went to Lockheed how soon after? I went there in 1958, and I got back from the service in 1957. So I only had about 9 months with GE, and then had to move on to Lockheed. And I was there for 3 years, and then came back in 1961.
And so tell me, and so of course at Lockheed, you were supposed to be working on A&P, and I guess in a way you were.
Right. We had a 10 megawatt reactor that was bare. It would be raised above the pool of water on a pedestal, and they could operate jet engines on a flat car. They could bring them in, mate them up. The control room was underground, and so you could operate the jet engine and irradiate them with this bare reactor. So there was some very, very interesting they weren't pre-startup, but surveys that we did at 1 megawatt, leading to gaining approval to operate the reactor.
And then that went down a ball of flames when the president canceled the whole project.
That's
Kennedy,
correct.
I guess, didn't he?
I think so, yes.
And then, as I remember, Kennedy canceled that project, and then at that point, you called back to see what was happening at the Hanford Ranch.
Right, and I went back there, and I
went into job there.
And I went into Carl Unruh's Spatial Studies group, and that's, I think, any young health physicist, if you can ever get into doing spatial studies, trying to take on spatial exposure situations, improve air sampling, whatever the assignment is.
What was your first assignment, do you remember?
Air sampling, trying to improve the measurement of air sampling on the plant. I remember pulling, we were looking at particle sizes in our plutonium facilities, and they threatened me when I went into 234.5, which is plutonium recovery facility, because we actually pulled samples from the glove boxes, ran them through our particle analyzer, and then put them back in. And they had just had a spread that had taken a week and a half to clean up. And one of them got me by the neck and said, "If you cause a spread, you're cleaning it up yourself." So, but we got some very excellent data out of that. And then I was only there, about a year, and Art Keene was in charge of an ANSI standard on radiation protection records. And at the same time, he felt like the records program at Hanford, the occupational exposure records, needed improvement. And so he reached in and pulled me out of that development group and put me in charge of the dosimetry and records. And
was it the first time you were really interested in standards at that point?
That would be my first shot at it, yes. And I was an ex officio member on that writing committee.
Now, how many standards have you worked on for the society? Because it seems to me there are many of them.
Oh, probably in the neighborhood of 20.
Phew, it's an awful lot over the years.
Right.
But I just remember you've been associated with them for so many years.
Right. Now I'm heavily involved in the international standards arena, particularly the instrument standards, the IEC. I'm chairman of a working group on electronic dosimeters and a member of the radiation protection subcommittee, which develops all of the radiation protection instrument standards.
Now, can you just remember off the top of your head, sometimes it takes a lot of years to bring a standard to fruition, and because you're working with all volunteer groups, of course. But can you remember offhand some of those standards that you feel are real achievements in the field?
Well, I think in the early days, a number of the standards, and I'll mention a couple. I want to mention here too that I probably really gained my love for standards because of the opportunity to work with Ed Valerio. And at the time I started working with him, he was what is now the chair of HPSSC, but then it was a little bit different. The standards that we do under the Health Physics Society now were being done under another organization out of New York. Anyway, Ed recognized that there was a need for a lot of operational standards, and the first one he asked me to chair was calibration of radiation protection instruments, N323. That has been, it's been a labor of love, but it's also been something that has, it was a difficult standard the first time we did it, and the second time we did it, and we've split it into 4 pieces now, it was even more difficult.
It's somehow at the heart of health physics, though, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It is. It is. And then I mentioned 13.6 which was the records standard.
Records keeping.
Records keeping. There was emergency instrumentation standard, which I think is N320, and then I was in charge of performance requirements for radiation protection instruments. That's 4217A, and I had other individuals that handled the B and C parts. So that's just a few of them.
But you've, if my memory serves me correctly, you've spent the larger part of your professional life working with and helping to produce standards.
I have been involved since about 1963, yes. And I love it. As I said, I'm still involved in the international standards, and I pay my own way. Because as you know, Sid, if you don't have somebody that supports you, you have to make a decision.
Absolutely, you have to make a decision. But your decision was to still work with professional standards.
That's correct.
And that says a lot for you, about you and your love of your profession, and the fact that, and it's wonderful that you can still contribute. Because you've been retired for a few years now.
I retired from Battelle at the end of 1992, went to work for Mel Chu as a consultant in radiation protection, and right now I'm working half-time along with Leo Faust as an RSO for a small manufacturing firm that manufactures XRF, portable XRF devices. So I'm keeping my fingers in it.
You certainly are. That's wonderful. Now, let's talk about your association with the society. You joined as a charter member back in the middle 50s.
That's correct.
And when was the first time that you actually got on a society committee?
Oh, boy.
That was, I know it was a long time ago.
Well, I tell you, I think, well, I obviously became associated with the Standards Committee early on, probably in the early 70s, under Ed Valerio, and I was in charge of one of the sections, which turned out to be the instrument section. Ed Valerio represented what is now the Health Physics Society part of it, and Joe Bellion represented what is the IEEE N42 part, and there was a joint group that were headed by Ed and Joe. So that would be the early ones that I got involved with the society, and then I think Jim Hart was the person that was influential in terms of getting me involved in some of the other activities of the society. He had wanted me to be secretary when he was the president, but you don't quite accomplish something of that sort, but he insisted that I be the chairman of the state and federal legislation. And under Jim, we did some things which I'm not sure have totally been done again.
What's that?
Well, we took on people like Ruckelshaus of the EPA. He pointed some people to a committee, advisory committee for radiation protection. There was one from Hanford, and Herb Parker spotted it first, and he said, well, this guy's the furthest from a manager that would espouse good radiation protection. How did he get appointed? And so I told Jim about it, and Jim said, let's find out. So we wrote a letter to Ruckelshaus, and he really got upset that we were questioning what the criteria was for the placement people on that. We took on states where the people were having problems with some of the state regulations or something sort. I still think it's an activity that we could be more involved in that way.
Well, how about telling us a little bit about that incredible General Electric group that Herb had put together and that you worked in? I think most people in society don't realize the excellence and the scope of that group that I think you were fortunate enough to be part of for so many years.
That's correct. Well, I've named a few, and I'll name them again, not in order of preference or anything, but certainly Herb first and foremost. Jack Healy, and he's still a good personal friend to today. Jack Corley, Joe Soldat, Carl Unruh, Ira Nelson, Bill Andrews, Leo Faust.
Is it just an unbelievable group of people?
It is an unbelievable. You caught me. I know I'm missing some that I shouldn't be, but Ken Hyde, Harold Larson.
Hal Larson, definitely.
So and these were all, as far as I'm concerned, these were and
Bill Resch.
And Bill Resch. That's correct.
Of course.
Phil Bramson, another, and incidentally, Phil Bramson just passed away here.
Sorry to hear that.
About 6 weeks ago. I think you're probably going to ask me, but if you're not, I'm going to answer it anyway. And that is, what have I contributed?
Absolutely.
And I think I'd like to think that perhaps my biggest contribution was that somehow I managed to attract, we talked about the ones that I got to work for.
Right.
I managed to attract a lot of leaders, and these are leaders in the society now. And Leo Faust was involved in that. And we managed to be able to fund this group. And we had people like Dr. DeRosier and Dr. Yoder and
Craig
Yoder. And
Art DeRosier.
Art DeRosier, Betty Murphy, Bartlett, Bill Bartlett from New Mexico. And this is just a small list of the ones that we had the opportunity to work with, and hopefully some of our mentoring has helped them. And that, I feel, was that's a contribution that I like.
Oh yes, it's wonderful to have people to work with you and for you that grow and end up being leaders in the profession. And I'm sure they, in turn, have mentored others, too.
Oh, yeah.
So it becomes a continuing chain. That's wonderful. Now, in the, I guess in the 60s, the Columbia chapter of the Society was formed.
That's correct, and I was a charter member of it.
And you were a charter member of it, and then it wasn't too many years after it was formed that I think you became an officer.
I think 1968, that may have been when I was secretary, treasurer, and then I was president. I don't remember the exact date.
But well, close thereafter.
So, yeah, and then I headed the 6th annual topical symposium, which was on radiation protection standards, Quo Vitas. And that was a lot of fun. That was the early 70s, 1971, I believe.
By the way, did you get the term Quo Vitas from Art or from Herb, or did you think of it yourself?
Actually, I think it was Herb and Ron. Catherine, yes.
'Cause it sounds like Herb.
Yeah.
The Quo
Oh,
Vitas. You said that, and I said, "Boy, that sounds like
Right,
Herb."
and he in fact gave the
Opening
speech.
You know,
Yes.
I was there, and I remember it.
Right. And he incidentally, he never hesitated to call on some of us. Another chap who died a number of years ago that I should mention is Lyle Carter. And I'd worked for Lyle for several years in policy and standards and licensing in Battelle. And then later on, Lyle worked for me. The same thing was true with Bernie Anderson and a couple of others. But anyway, Lyle and Herb would want some information, and so he would come down and say, "Oh, by the way," and he'd sit there and fidget because he'd never bring his cigarettes, and Lyle would have to offer him a cigarette, and then we'd find out what it was that Herb wanted us to do. Well, he was interested in how many standards and regulations there were early in the stage of radiation protection, and how many there were in 1971 when we had our symposium, and so we went through and hopefully came up with most of those, and then based on those 2 points, then he made a projection, and there's been a couple of articles done by Alan Brodsky since then in which he has taken that on, looked at Herb's numbers, and has taken that. And it's an exponential in terms of the number of standards and regulations.
Sadly for the regulations, maybe not for the standards, because the standards
Well,
are...
you even look at, IAEA, NCRP, ICRP, then you've got the international consensus standards, and these, it gets to the point where if you don't have a good organization that will purchase these, you have a hard time staying up with what's going on.
Oh, absolutely. They're very expensive. The ICRP dues per year, I shouldn't say dues, but charges per year are quite high now.
Yes, they are.
Well, look, you've been working for the society in more than just the capacity of being Mr. Standard, so to speak, because you've generated so many of these. How about telling us about some of the other things that you've done? You were, I guess you were the main person that put together this topical symposium, the mid-year. Then tell us about some of your other involvements.
Well, the involvement with Jim Hart led to me being elected secretary, and so I was secretary and board for three years. I was elected a fellow, and then what really made me proud in 1990, I was given the Founders Award, and that has a very prominent place on my wall, along with some of the other things.
It's a very important award to be a founder of our society.
I've worked wherever they've needed me. I've also been involved in the CHP activities, and I was in charge of an ad hoc group which put together the criteria and the policy, if you will, for the AAHP. So that I was happy to have a hand in.
So you've spent, I guess, the larger part of your professional life associated with the society and doing things for them, as a matter of fact. I guess if you, from my point of view, your continuing work that you do on the standards and all the past work is just an incredible continuum, so to speak, of professionalism and of helping the professionalism of the society. Now, we have a few minutes left here, Jack. How about
Pardon me.
how about giving us the benefit of your projection of where you think the society is going to be going in the years to come, and and any advice you have for youngsters that would be entering the profession?
Well, let's take the last one first. I think when a person chooses a profession, they shouldn't be sitting back waiting to be fed by somebody else. They should immediately start trying to find out what they can do to become actively involved, and that goes to the local chapter, and that then leads to the national. I think that I learned more from the having the opportunity to work with others that I wouldn't have if I hadn't have gotten involved in some of the committees, hadn't gotten involved in some of the standards. One of the things that both my wife and I treasure is that we have friends throughout the world, and fortunately some of them we get to see it about every 12 to 15 months when we have the meeting of IEC TC 45. We're heading to France the end of March.
Oh, wonderful.
For the next one of those meetings. And my wife and some of the other wives from around the world have already started figuring out what it is they're going to see while we're busy in the standards meeting. So if you get involved, then your sphere of knowledge, but also your sphere of friends and colleagues grows. And to me, that's more important, perhaps, than having something behind your name. It's the friendships are real and lasting, and that may last a lot longer than contributions that any of us make.
Yes, well, it's awfully nice to be able to mix the sociability with the professionalism.
Right.
But it sort of makes life worthwhile when you can do both, doesn't it?
Right. Now, the other question, to quickly answer, you're probably running out of time, but I think the society in the next few years is at a point where there's going to have to be some very, very tough decisions made. Talking with people from some of the other chapters that were at the meeting, there are a number of chapters that are in trouble because of the lack of membership. And the attendance, and I didn't hear a figure for this meeting, but the attendance certainly is down some because there is not the support from various organizations that we used to have. And when you're young and you've got a young family, you can't afford to pay your way down here like I did to come to this one. So it cannot become a society of old people. So I think that we're going to have to look more at regional meetings, and perhaps we may need to look at the possibility of video conferencing annual meetings, or maybe starting out with some mid-years, because there are very few areas of the country where you've got any collection of health physicists that you don't have good video conferencing facilities. So it may be that in order for us to continue to gain future understanding and to see the profession grow in terms of knowledge and contribution, we may have to turn to some other mechanism for these so vitally important associations that occur when you have a meeting such as this.
Yes, thank you for those words of wisdom, and it's a good thought. I think we need to do this in any case, whether or not we can keep up the meetings or not, that there needs to be other modes of communication that are effective, and other modes where people can get continuing education credits to keep up their boards.
Right.
Well, Jack, again, thank you for spending time. The History Committee very much appreciates your sitting in here with us and sharing with us your life and your contributions to our society. And well, we certainly look forward to a continuing contribution in the standards area from you, too. So thank you again.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Certainly. Now, you'll get a copy of this.
Oh.
And if there...
Oops, ooh, I almost blew that one.
Yeah. In the beginning of this, there needs to be an edit. Jack Selby worked for Jack Selby at one time.